Angus, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate it. So we felt it was timely to just have a brief discussion, given that many of the people that we're working with at the moment are in Module 1, to talk about strengths, because it's obviously such a pivotal part of the program, if that's okay with you. And so I thought possibly to start off with, possibly to talk about, the survey and establishing character strengths and how one does that, given that it gives you kind of an order of those and how they fit into performance strengths and passion strengths.
Yeah, hi everybody. So very happy to share a few words here and indeed going forward on other topics as well. But let's start with strengths today. So I think the first thing to talk about here is we're talking about character strengths as opposed to technical strengths. Technical strengths is what you've learned how to do. Character strengths is more about who you are as a person. And underneath the who you are as a person, there are two aspects. One is what's your natural affinity for things. So what are you naturally more inclined to be good at? And secondly is what do you love doing? And that's your passion strengths. And it's the overlap between those two areas which are really interesting. I'll give an example in a minute. But just before we talk about the survey, I want to say that this whole strengths thing is really one of the biggest gifts, if you like, of the program. But it turns out to be one of the most difficult to grasp. This is why we start the program with it, so you have more time to run with it. And the way to think about it is less of a sort of dispensing machine where you put your dime in and you get your answer out, but rather a process that requires multiple bites of the cherry as you get closer and closer and closer to understanding what these things are. And indeed, I'd almost go so far as to say that this could even be a lifelong journey, figuring out what are your true character strengths. Now, the survey, or at least the VIA survey that you do at the beginning of the program, because there will be other surveying methods in the program as we have other bites of the cherry, but the VIA survey gives you in sort of decreasing order your top 24 character strengths. Now, the important thing here is to say that you choose the 3 that you want from that list. It doesn't have to be the top 3 if they don't particularly resonate for you. If you want to pick 3 others that are sitting in the middle of the table, that's fine. This is about you figuring out what your strengths are. And by the way, if some of you perhaps have selected the top 3 and then looking back maybe think it should have been another 3, I'm quite happy just to open up the platform to let you sort of go back and change that. You'll have to let me know, and I'll go ahead and do that for whichever of you want to do that. So this is really the first of the bites of the cherries, figuring out what may be at the top of the list for you. But it is really important to go and talk about these to people who know you well. So obviously spouses and friends and other colleagues, to hear what they have to say, because they see you and they have a sense for who you are. So that's really just some overall words on how to think about that. I can give a few examples in a minute, but maybe just hand back to Grant. Any other questions on your side in terms of what have been coming up in that respect?
Thanks. So Angus, that's really good. That that I suppose the survey is just a starting the process of getting to know a bit more about the essence of you and the like. So in terms of identifying performance strengths, could you talk a bit more about how one does that?
Yeah, I mean, let me just sort of give you the example from me, from my life. Now, I'm not like you folks on this program, but hopefully as a story, it'll resonate somewhat. So, when I was at university 30 years ago, I studied maths. And then my first job was in a consulting firm, which is quite an analytical environment. And they took a look at my CV when I joined, and they put me on financial modeling. And now, of course, having studied maths, I can do modeling. There's no problem with that. But in reality, the kind of maths that I did at university was more at the abstract end of the spectrum. So pure maths. This is all around patterns and that kind of stuff. And so whilst I was doing this financial modeling, I didn't really realize at the time I had no alternative way of thinking about it. It wasn't really sort of my natural affinity. So in a way, it was a performance strength for me. but it wasn't really my passion strength. And then after about 2 years in this environment, where I was doing just okay, I found myself on a different type of project, which is more of a strategic project. And all of a sudden, sort of something clicked in my head, because strategy was really all around, it's about simplifying a complex world. It's about looking for patterns. And there was something that resonated for me when it comes to pure maths, because pure maths is also about looking for patterns and sort of finding simplicity in a very, very complex, albeit abstract world. And this is the moment when my career really started to take off, and I realized that there's this sort of performance strength that I have of seeing simplicity in a complex world was really able to express itself through these strategy projects. And then as the years went by, that sort of synthesizing skill ended up becoming a communication skill, sort of helping other people sort of see simply where ordinarily they'd be seeing things that are complex. And you know, when Tal and I got together to found Potential Life back in 2011, it's really the coming together of two very different brains. And Tal is the exhaustive, scientific, encyclopedic brain that's got everything inside his head. And my brain perhaps doesn't have a lot going on inside my head, but I have an ability to look at stuff and simplify. And in a way that the sharp framework is the coming together of those two heads, because you have on the one hand the exhaustivity coming from Tal, and on the other hand the sort of accessibility that came from my sort of communication brain. So hopefully that example just gives you some sort of something to play with. Some other examples, you know, we have program participants who talk about how one of their character strengths is, for example, humor. And they say, how on earth am I really expected to use humor as a strength? I mean, I can be funny at work, but how do I use it as a professional strength? And then we had one participant telling the story of they work in a hospital in an operating theatre environment. And the senior anesthetist was a bit of a bully and always sort of being nasty to the supporting staff, the nurses and the lab techs and so on. And this nurse, who had humor as a character strength, realized that by sort of launching carefully thought through humorous jibes at the anesthetist, she was able to make the anesthetist realize that he was being unpleasant, unfair, and not creating a good working environment. And it actually had a taming effect on his behavior. And sort of by doing so, making a real positive contribution as a leader to the vibe inside the operating theatre. So using humor as a way to disarm people who are behaving inappropriately. Another example, some of you may have this, you know, you're working in the military environment, and some of you may have had the character strength of love. And you may say, well, you know, are you seriously telling us that we need to find a way of sort of bringing more love into our work? Isn't there something a little bit odd about such a suggestion? Well, this is about thinking about who you are and how that comes to bear in your working environment. And, you know, we often have people working in hardcore sales environments who end up with the character strengths of love, and they find that quite confusing. And what has happened on a few times is salespeople who do not have love as a strength, they can admire those salespeople that do, because the salespeople that do tend to be the ones that remember their client's name, have a genuine care for their clients and maybe their children, and so that when they meet their clients again, they have a much more immediate, spontaneous, and intimate conversation that leads to business. Something that the people who don't have this have to note down and put it in a database, and it all comes over more sort of sterile and stilted. So these things really do come to play, but you have to really explore this, view this strengths journey as a chance to really have a good think about those character strengths, speak to other people, and ask yourselves, how can I bring them out more, realizing that this is an expression of who I am. So it's not about trying to be somebody different because the strengths tell me to be this. It's rather about realizing who you are and letting that come out more naturally.
Sure. So Angus, thanks for that. So would you suggest like you suggested, that people talk to people that are close to them about their character strengths and just to get, if you like, reinforcement or other people's view. Would you suggest that they might want to do that with performance strengths? I mean, obviously people have a view of what they're good at, but is it worthwhile sometimes having a discussion with someone else saying, look, this is what I think I am good at. Do you concur with that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, we're social animals, and this isn't. I encourage you not to view this as a sort of introverted analytical process. We are all interacting with other people all the time, and they have opinions about us. Well, it's pretty good to know what they think. So ask them, see what they say. Tell them, here are my top 3 strengths. What do you think? And maybe your spouse is going to say, those first 2, I'm not sure about that. But that 3rd one, that's really interesting. And what about this one, a little bit low down? Yeah, that's definitely you. And then you ask somebody else and they say maybe the same too. And then you start to realize that there's some patterns here. So if other people are saying this about you, therefore it must be true after all. So the value of speaking to other people is really around validation of the idea.
Good. So Angus, could we just talk about just briefly, achieving peak potential, the marrying of performance and passion strengths, and and how one can possibly incrementally increase that overlap.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean, maybe one of the questions that's being asked is it possible really to sort of achieve time in the peak potential zone in the workplace? And in theory, you may come to the conclusion that you're in the wrong place because you don't get to spend time in the peak potential zone. But given where you are all at in your careers right now, I would guess you've had many steps along the way to validate that you're pretty much in the right place. So let's not go down that path. The question is, how can I really bring these out? And the answer is yes, of course you can. Of course, there are things that you love doing that you can do more of, and things that you're really good at that you can do more of. That's the real opportunity here. And the way to think about this, as Graham was saying, is in incremental terms. Don't ask yourself, oh no, I'm going to have to transform everything I do at work. Just say, are there just a few small things that I can start doing more of that will really allow you to be closer to what your natural affinity is as a human being? Take it small steps at a time. By the way, this is one of the important principles of the program, and just see how far that takes you.
Yeah, good. So Angus, just a question. Is it common or not unusual for people to have a really significant difference in the survey of where they report using their strengths in work versus not work?
So the VIA Strengths Survey is a self-assessment.
Yeah.
And the reason why we use a lot of self-assessments in the program is, for the most part, they are 80% accurate. In other words, pretty good. Now, you could do a full extensive 360 assessment to maybe get from 80 to 90%. The problem with those is they're actually quite burdensome to deploy. And when a lot of you are all doing it, you're all finding yourself answering each other's questions, and you kind of get lost in a plate of spaghetti of 360 surveys. So for the most part, they're pretty reliable. But remember, this is about taking bites at a cherry and using the data to get closer to who you are. So don't get hung up on whether the survey is right or wrong. Look at the data of this survey and say, what can I take from this to help me in my own mental process to get to a closer understanding of who I am? There will be other surveys as you go through the Potential Life program, including collecting feedback from 5 people who know you well. For those of you who have done module 2, you remember you've provided those email addresses. You're going to be talking to other people about your strengths. And so there will be some other opportunities for this. But remember, it's about successive bites at the cherry.
Right. Yeah. So the early surveys are not definitive. It's a journey about getting to know oneself progressively, and increasing, leveraging more through that process.
Yeah, it's a journey of making your own sense from the various sources of data that are being provided to you. That's the most important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's good, Angus. Look, thanks for that. Is there anything that you would add in terms of just generally around the strengths?
No, I mean, it's one of the most important things that you can take away from the program. It's not the only important thing. You know, there are 5 big themes in the program, but some of the other themes in the program are more immediate. You know, for example, when you get on to absorption, which is in modules 5 and 6, that's pretty immediate, and the benefits will be fairly immediate for most of you. So that's kind of reassuring. Strengths is perhaps one of the biggest gifts, but it takes some of the heaviest lifting in terms of getting there. So be patient, trust the process, and remember to do this in a social way to involve other people in this journey with you.